All right, everyone, so let's continue with our discussion about insect wings and their variations. So, in the previous segment, we talked about all the complexity of the venation and the attachment to the body. This time, we're just going to talk about the evolutionary differences between the wings and their specializations. So, starting out here, we're looking at the most primitive flying insect. There are insects that never developed wings, like the silverfish and the firebrats, the apterous insects, the apterous, so without wings. But this is the first winged versions of insects. So these are the odonates, these are the dragonflies. And they have the most, first, the most complex venation, but also the simplest wing attachments. So if you look at this, you'll see the top of the wing has the costal vein. Below that is the subcosta, like we talked about last time. So you start from the base. It goes costa, subcosta, radius, medius, cubitus, anal, and jugal. Up here you can see the pterostigma. Let me grab this. Let me put this on yellow so everyone can see what I'm talking about. So this area up here, this is the pterostigma. Here. So like I said, sometimes they have a defined point of cellular or wing cell coloration. So we'll zoom in here so you can see that dragonflies, the odonates, have extremely complex mesh-like venation. So you have the major veins running this way, and then you have cross veins running this way. So these are the cross veins, and in between the major veins and cross veins, that is what you would call a cell. And each of these cells in insect wings is generally given some sort of designation, so that if you are talking about the shape of one specific cell, everyone knows what you're talking about. With more simplified wings, it's much easier because you don't have so much going on. With dragonflies, it can be a little difficult because there's so much going on. Additionally, if you look at the base here, these wings at no point do they touch. They're not overlapping. So last time we talked about how the wings evolved in many insects to either overlap or to attach to each other via hooks because it saves energy when they're flying. One, it makes them more aerodynamic. Two, they can save energy because the muscles that are beating here, let me zoom out a little bit more. The muscles that are beating in the thorax here, when they're pumping down, drag the other wing with them and so on, so they assist each other. The dragonfly wings are not attached at all. This is the most primitive setup. If we move on to the next groups of insects, generally speaking, as insects become more evolved, they reduce the amount of veins, the wings become attached, and they may even get new additions to the wings. Like some wings harden, sometimes they lose wings entirely. It becomes a more efficient flying process, and the wings become overall simpler. So if we move on to like the Neuroptera, these are the lace wings. You still see that there's a lot of venation, similar to, this is a mantispid, similar to the odonates, but there is overall fewer cross veins, fewer cells. So you can see how many tiny cells there are here. The Neuroptera, which are a fairly highly evolved species or group order, have fewer veins, even though this particular group is well known for how many veins they have. Neuroptera literally means lace wings. But you can still see a reduction in the venation. But you can also tell that these wings aren't necessarily overlapping again. This one is dead and pinned, so it's a little different. But the wings can be easily pulled apart, whereas like with butterflies, the wings can't be pulled apart so easily. If we move on to the wasps, wasps generally hook their wings together. I believe it's with hannuli hooks, but you can still see an overall reduction in venation, especially between the two wings. So the forewing generally has more veins than the hind wing does in wasps. And in some parasitic wasps, this venation is reduced even further. So it'll only have like one major vein in each wing. Sometimes the hind wing has no major veins, or it'll just have like a little stub of a costa. I wonder if you can see the hannuli on this. Yeah, you can. So you can see some of the hooks on the wings that would hold the wings together. And then in more complex kind of wing formations, this is held on to with retinaculum. The bristle and retinaculum hold the butterfly and moth wings together. One of the interesting things that I wanted to point out with this is, in this case, the venation is slightly reduced from something like the Neuroptera, but the veins can be extremely difficult to see because these are called Lepidoptera. These are the butterflies and moths, so Lepidoptera. Lepido means scale, so Lepidoptera is scale wings. Maybe let's change this to orange. Is that a little better? It is. Lepidoptera. So the scale wings. The butterflies and moths evolved scales to cover not just their wings, but their whole bodies. And so the presence of these scales and their coloration can make it very, very difficult to see some of the cross veins and things like that. And in some cases, even the major veins when you're talking about things like gray moths. So you really have to either look very carefully or ideally, and this is, no one wants to do this, butterfly collectors never want to do this, is you strip the scales off the wings. The presence of the scales does quite a bit. If we zoom in here, this is what the scales look like under high magnification. The scales are slightly protective, but they also, obviously, they provide a lot of colors for either camouflage or species recognition for like mating. They can also, if you look at the microstructure of many of these scales, they also have a lot of other structures on them. Sometimes they have pheromone-emitting glands and things like that nestled in, but you'd have to go to very high microscopy. So these are kind of the four-winged insects that we're talking about right now. This next group, they are four-winged, but I kind of want to call them four-winged, but only two of them are used for flight. So sometimes with insects, the most obvious thing that they do is form like a shell-like structure. And depending on the group of insects, we use different names for that. But in things like the katydids and the grasshoppers, they have one set of wings that they use for flight. These are the flight wings. And this one is more used for protection. The fore wings are for protection, the hind wings are for flight. This fore wing is called a tegmen. And the plural is tegmina. So they have a pair of tegmina that they use for some protection. These, in the orthopteroids, so the grasshoppers and the katydids and the crickets and the things that are related to them, kind of like the praying mantises, the cockroaches and things like that, their forewing always have these tegmen evolutions. So the tegmen is thick and leathery, and it does help them kind of protect their more fragile membranous wings from the environment. But their hind wings are very well developed, and you can see all the cross veins here. So this grasshopper, this is the tegmen. So that you can't really see that well. The top one is the tegmen, and this is the hind wing for flight. So again, you can see that it has lots of veins. Grasshoppers are relatively primitive for an insect. They don't go through metamorphosis. They're relatively low on the evolutionary tree, as it were. So they still have a lot of the venation that you see in the orthoptera or in the odonates, so like the dragonflies and the damselflies, but you can still tell that it's somewhat reduced. But because they have this tegmen, the hind wing has to do all of the work, so they tend to be very large, and these fold into themselves. Let's go with a darker color here. If you were to collect one and kill it, you would see that these wings fold into themselves, kind of like a paper fan, and they fold up, and the tegmen sits on top of it, protecting the whole thing. So that's how that works. Other variations of protective shell-like outer wings. This is an example of the Hemiptera. These are the true bugs. And in the Hemiptera, their forewing is called the hemelytra. Hemelytra. And again, it's a very leathery, almost like a shell-like structure. The difference is that only this top part, the basal part, is leathery. So this down here is membranous. This is membrane. And up here, this is the corium. And usually this is like a triangular structure called a cuneus. Cuneus, is that correct? Yeah, cuneus. But it works the same way as the grasshopper wings do, where the wings kind of fold, the wings for flight are larger and they fold up underneath, and then this membranous layer lays on top, or this leathery layer lays on top of it to protect it. Generally, the Hemiptera are not great flyers because they don't have two sets of flight wings, but they can still fly. And then lastly, you have the best example of this. These are beetles, the Coleoptera. Coleoptera literally meaning shield wing. The forewings on the Coleoptera are thickened into very hard layers called the elytra, or one is called an elytron, and the plural is elytra. You can still see the venation in the wing, where it could be. These are called the striae. I can't spell that. Yeah, STRIAE. Striae. The striations, where you could imagine if it wing veins would be, although these are not veins. So like the grasshoppers and the true bugs, these outer wings will fold up, and large membranous wings from behind will fan out like a paper fan. And most beetles aren't great flyers. They're kind of bumbling, not exactly great. And depending on the location of these beetles, they might not even have very large elytra. So these are like glowworm beetles. These structures here are the elytra, and they're highly reduced. You also see this in like soil-dwelling rove beetles, the staphylinids. Very, very small elytra, not very protective, but still very large membranous hind wings that are used in flight. So now we'll move on to other groups of insects. Some groups of insects only have two wings, and this kind of this is a good example of what an insect evolving into a two-wing flight system looks like. Some insects only have two wings. They've lost completely the either front pair or hind pair. The most obvious version of this are the flies, the Diptera. So Diptera meaning two wing. They only have the forewings. But this group of insects still follows the pattern of a loss of venation in the more complex flies. So this is a mosquito, and they have very veiny wings. They don't have as many veins as like a dragonfly or a grasshopper, but for a fly, they have lots and lots of veins, and you can see the veins in the wings there. If we go to a more evolved fly, this is the Stratiomyia. These are soldier flies. You can see that there's a general reduction in the veins. Most of the veins are concentrated in the anterior portion of the wing. And then even further, this is again another soldier fly. And very, very few veins here. You can tell that this is just overall a reduction. The important part here is that flies only have two wings. And so you say, well, what happened to the other wings? The other wings are technically right here. These are called halteres. And if we zoom in there, you'll see little nubbins. And this is all that's left of the fly's hind wings. And they are useful. They're not just dead nubs. They act kind of like gyroscopes when the fly is in flight. and it helps them be highly maneuverable. So if you've ever tried to swat a fly, you know that they're very good at dodging, and this is one of the reasons that they're so good at dodging. The other group of insects that only have 2 wings, and that the whole group only has 2 wings, are called the strepsipterans. I say the whole group because there is one type of beetle that only has 2 wings, but it's a one-off. These are the strepsipterans, and they only have their hind wings. So these nubbins here are the forewings. This group is called the Strepsiptera. And they only have their hind wings. This is a male. Only the male strepsipterans have wings. The females are parasitic, so they don't actually fly, but the males do fly. And otherwise they curl these membranous wings up behind them when they're not in flight. The reason this is a drawing, and the reason that we're using a drawing for this is Strepsiptera are extremely small. They're endoparasitoids, so they lead parasitic lives, usually on other insects, and they're tiny. So it's not a lot of great pictures. And then at the end, there are insects with no wings. So the ant is the most obvious choice for this. Termites are the other one. These are secondarily wingless. Winglessness. So they are at a point where they don't need the wings. They've lost them again. Not all ants are born wingless. So reproductive males and females have wings. So the kings and queens have wings, but then they lose the wings. So they have 4 wings, and they lose the wings. And these wing losses, they're called deciduous wings. I won't write that out, but deciduous, like deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the fall. Once the male and female reproductives for ants, they fly out of their colony, they mate, they land to form a new colony, and then their wings fall off. And the reason they do this is so that they can self-cannibalize their flying muscles, because they need the energy for egg laying. So all the worker ants that are born are secondarily wingless. They never develop wings, but the reproductives do develop wings. It's the same for termites. The termite queen and king develop wings when they do their mating flights, but then they fall off. Ants, the queens and the reproductive males, they're not really kings, but the reproductive males will also go through this process of growing wings, mating, and then losing the wings. So that's kind of examples of secondary winglessness. This will kind of wrap up our introduction to wing specialization. I want to move on to the abdomen general layout. I might come back. I still haven't talked about the tracheal system, which is how insects breathe, and that begins on the thorax, but it's on the thorax and the abdomen. I wasn't sure where I wanted to put it. I'll probably do it once I've introduced the abdomen, and then we'll just talk about the whole back end of the insect at once. Okay, thanks guys. I'll see you next time.